If you're not familiar with Kenya, Kenya is located in East Africa. And you can see here, for several decades, it was a British protectorate and then a colony of Britain. So when you travel to Kenya and other places in East Africa, you have several different languages that might potentially be spoken. In East Africa, Swahili is sort of a common language amongst the countries. Most of the peoples, though, the different people groups have a local language of their own, which there may be more than one people group, in a country. So you'll have different languages that can be spoken between the different people groups. But lots of people do speak English because of the British influence. So if you'll take a look at these two maps here, the one on the left, obviously you can see where Kenya is located. It's all the way on the east side of the country. And the equator runs through the country. And if you look at the map on the right, the smaller square or rectangle shows Nairobi, which is the capital of Kenya. That's where we flew into. We left from Atlanta, flew to Amsterdam, and then came from Amsterdam down to Nairobi. That's where we landed. We landed about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. So we stayed over in Nairobi that night and one more day. And then we got up and drove from Nairobi to Meru, which is where we spent most of our time. And so the larger rectangle closer to the middle of the country includes Meru, where we spent most of our time, and also Isiola, which is a little north of Meru. And I'll say something about that a bit later. So mission trip to East Africa to Kenya. These are the dates of our travel and our basic itinerary. We left from Atlanta on the evening of May 21, and we returned to Atlanta on the evening of June 25. It takes, a couple days to get there and to get back. So, we left on the 21st, but we didn't make it there until the night of the 22nd. And as I said, we spent a little time there, a day and a half or so in Nairobi. Then we went to speak at the Kithain Church of Christ, which is in the Meru area. That first Sunday, we spent the full week in between the two Sundays that we were there teaching the book of Revelation. They asked us to teach at the Meru School of Theology. And then that Sunday, the second Sunday, we worshiped with the Chumvi Church of Christ, which is in a Maasai area. And I preached there. And when we left there, we went to this National Game Reserve and spent, I think, 2 nights there before we went back to Nairobi and made our way back to the United States. These pictures here just show you some of the skyline in Nairobi. Now, this is from the hotel where we stayed. We stayed at the Lotus Inn. I think it was 5 or 6 floors, a relatively comfortable hotel we stayed in. You'd be comfortable staying in this kind of hotel if you were here in the United States. It's not a 5-star or something like that, but very comfortable Marriott or something like that. And you can see Nairobi is the capital city, a very modern kind of place. A lot of the things that you would expect to find in a big city, you can find there. This is a photo on the left of the outside of the Lotus Inn where we stayed. This is Caleb, and he's standing with Miranda, who was one of the folks that we went with. Miranda and her husband, Rick, were missionaries in Kenya for 10 years. And so, this was a logical couple for us to go with because they had been there, they knew people and so forth. And on the right, this is the inside of the Lotus Inn. And this is actually a friend of Caleb's that we knew when we stayed in DC. We know his family. He still lives in Kenya. His family had lived there for a time. And so he and Caleb were able to visit while we were there. While we were in Nairobi, the one full day we stayed there, we did kind of some touristy things. We went to this elephant orphanage, and they have elephants who are orphaned for various reasons. The mother dies or is hunted or something like that. And they keep these elephants and take care of them for several years until they're able to reintegrate them into the wild. And they told us all about this process, a very lengthy, involved process that takes several years. We also went to a giraffe center, similar kind of thing. I don't think these giraffes are orphaned, but they're being cared for by the government. And so you can feed these guys, and they have long, rough tongues and aggressive necks. Like if you don't feed them fast enough, they will encourage you to move faster. When we were leaving Nairobi, I don't know much about this place here, but the Jemani House, we stopped at this place, and it's a Christian mission of some sort. And the ladies here are being taught how to, start businesses and maintain businesses, and how to do accounting and stuff like that. It's sort of an empowerment ministry for women. And so we got to meet these women that you see in the photograph here. Some of them, were mothers and grandmothers. A couple of them were younger, but they were learning how to have businesses of their own, and, how to establish some kind of financial independence, which is a very much needed thing. Even in Nairobi, this was still in Nairobi, in the capital city. The picture on the right was a photo as we're driving from Nairobi up to Meru. We went through Nanyuki, and the equator runs right where we were standing. So there's a sign there. We were driving along. We got out and we went and took a few pictures at this sign. And so this is Caleb and I standing on the equator. The drive from Nairobi to Meru took, I don't know, 6 hours or something like that. It was a pretty lengthy drive. So it was 18 hours of flight time to get from Atlanta to Nairobi. And like I said, we stayed the night there, got some rest. And then it was 6 hours or so to drive up to the area where we are. Now, Nairobi's big capital city. Where we were going, Meru is not. We were going to a more remote area. We were going up in elevation, and that's where we were going to be for the bulk of our time in the country. So we got to the Meru school, or we got to Meru, I want to say it was that Friday, and that Saturday morning, we went to visit the school. This is where we were going to do our teaching for the week. So we went first just to tour the campus and meet folks and that kind of thing. So some of the pictures, in the one on the left here shows you in the front, the building where they have their church services. And then to the left, there are classrooms. So there's two classrooms to the left. You can only see the one half of that building, so you can see one classroom. But that one to the left, that's where we taught during the week. And there were larger assemblies, meetings of church leaders and stuff like that happening in the bigger building on Sundays. People worship in that building. On the right, you can see the dorm buildings. So in Meru, the roads are not that great. Most people don't have cars. So transportation can be difficult. So when people want to go to the school to take classes, they're going to travel hours to get to the school, and they're not going to go back and forth hours without a vehicle, getting to the school and the costs that are involved and so forth. So when people come to the school, they will come to the school and stay at the school a few days while they take these classes. And so the building at the top right shows you the dorms. There's a side that for the men, and there's a side for the women. And the picture at the bottom right shows you the bedding situation here. It's a series of bunk beds. There's not like any extra space. I mean, it's a large room with a bunch of bunk beds in there, and they have some mattresses that can roll out, rather thin mattresses that can roll out for people to sleep in when they're there for their classes. There's just a few pictures of the school. So that day, we didn't do any work. We went there, and the folks at the school prepared a meal for us. And so we really just got to sit down and meet with folks and visit and talk. It was a good time. But the picture at the right on the left, the top left, you can see the classrooms again. And then at the far left, in the back there, is the bathroom facilities. Not like our bathroom facilities, it's basically there's some holes in the ground where you'd have to use the bathroom. That little orange thing you see in the photo, that's the station for washing your hands and so forth. The picture here in the middle with the woman, this is the kitchen facility in the building where they prepare all the food. And of course, you can see it's a wood burning, I guess you can call it a stove, but it's open fire where the food is being prepared. And the ladies worked really hard, prepared a lot of food, and it was very good. But probably not the kinds of accommodations that most of us would be used to for preparing a lot of food. This picture on the right, I wanted you to see because this man's name is Joseph. The school has two full-time employees besides the director, and I'll tell you about the director in a moment. Joshua is one of the two, and he's responsible for watching over this campus at night. He's like the night watchman of the school. Security is a really big deal in Kenya. Everywhere we went, everything was gated. All the homes were gated. The businesses were gated. The hotel where we stayed, like there's a security person there. In order for you to get to the hotel, you have to go through security. Everywhere we went was like that. And it was the same for the school. And I didn't have a great fence like some of these other places or a great gate like some of these other places, but it'll be surrounded with some barbed wire and some wild brush and that kind of thing. But there is a gate that you have to go through in order to get onto the campus. And Joshua gave us the tour of a tour of the campus. Caleb did a recording. If anyone would want to see that, I think it's 10 or 12 minutes. He walked through all the buildings and recorded the facilities. The facilities are in some disrepair, and I'll say something about that too in a few moments. So this picture on the left, you can see we're standing in front of the dining hall. This is the class that we taught. So you can see the men and the women that were a part of that class. I'm standing in the back. In the photo to the right is Rick. Rick is the gentleman I told you had mentioned had gone to Kenya, had been there for 10 years as a missionary. To the far right, the other white gentleman is a visiting professor at the law school. So it was Caleb and myself. It was Rick and Mike, this visiting professor, and Rick's wife. It was the five of us who took the trip. In this photo, to my left, like on the photo, on the screen to my left, is Jeffrey. Jeffrey Karima is the director of the school. And right in front of me in the photo is a man named Raphael. He did yeoman's work because he translated the whole time. So out of the 4 days of teaching, I taught about 2.5 of those days, but there were 4 days of teaching, and Raphael was the only translator for the 4 days. So, I said he worked harder than all of us because he never got a break. In the picture on the right, you can see that first meal that we had when we went to visit the facilities on that Saturday. And I could kind of go around and tell you the names of all these people, but you wouldn't remember all of that. But I do want to point out at the far end of the table, in the middle, is Jeffrey. Again, he's the director of the school. And on the screen to the right between Jeffrey and I is Joshua, the person who I told you watches over the facilities in the evening. And then in the front of this picture to the left, there's a woman wearing, I don't know how to describe this color here, but I don't know, maybe that's fuchsia or something like that, but she's got brown and black hair. That woman is named McKenna, and she is a very influential woman amongst the women in the Meru area. So Meru is a city. It's also the county, and it's also the name of this people group. So, in this area, they're going to speak Swahili or Kiswahili. They're going to speak Meru or Kimeru, and some people are going to speak English as well. Well, this is a big county, and this woman is a very influential woman amongst all the women in the Meru area. So this is just a couple of pictures of our teaching during the week. You can see the classroom where we are. Raphael is standing right next to me the whole time, translating. It was a good week and a lot of good questions. A lot of the students in the class were from the Churches of Christ in the area, but not all. They invited anybody who wanted to come. People in these churches who are teachers and leaders in these various churches. So we did have some mix there, which was good because we wound up, having some kind of studies and questions about some things that may not have come up otherwise. We're going through the book of Revelation, and as we're doing that, certain questions would come up, and we were able to deal with those as we went along. It was a very engaging study, very engaging. Now, I wanted to show you this picture as well. Now, this woman on the left, her name is Sylvia. And Sylvia is married to a man named Jackson. Jackson preaches in the services that are held in that building that I told you where they have church services on Sundays. Jackson he has a secular job of selling insurance. That's how he takes care of himself, supports his family, but he also preaches. And as we're touring the building, we walk into this room, which is their library. It's probably underwhelming for most of us, what we would think of as a library. And the materials, a lot of these materials are really old. Like I looked at some of the materials and I thought, wow, okay, this stuff is not going to be very helpful. And if had I known that there was a need, I would have brought at least one suitcase of nothing but books, because I could have done that out of my own library. If I go back, and I do hope to go back, this is one of the things that I would hope to address, because it'd be very easy for us to just donate some books and help them with that. But I asked to take this picture of Sylvia because when we walked into this room, I asked her, sister, what are these tables? And she said, these are like sewing tables. And I said, okay, well, why are they here? What are we doing with these tables? And she said, well, years ago, we had a program where we could teach women how to sew and to become seamstresses, and they could then, earn money to support themselves and their families and so forth. And I said, okay, well, why don't we have that anymore? And she said, well, we don't have any money to do it. And I said, okay, how much money would you need to do that? And she couldn't tell me at the moment, but that initiated several conversations that I had about how preachers in the area were supporting themselves. And here's the fact of the matter. I found this out like that Saturday. The average annual income in this region is about $1,000 a year. Okay, so that makes it pretty difficult for people to buy anything, $1,000 a year. The folks in this area are very, very poor. So I showed you the skyline there in Nairobi. We're 6 hours or 7 hours away from that, up in elevation, like into a mountainous area. This is not Nairobi. We're way out, and there's very little like economy, and folks are very much self-sufficient. Like they eat what they grow, they have what they make, and they might have $1,000 a year. And then by the time you pay for electricity, if you could have a car and you can pay for gas, which is higher than it is in the United States, if you can believe that. If you don't have a car, you have to pay for, the equivalent of our Uber, which is riding on the back of a bike to get from to and fro, just not very much money. So the people in the churches don't have money. The people in the churches then cannot give money to support the work the way we would expect maybe. We were at a church and people were bringing like sugar cane. That was their donation, which is fine. That's what they have. But it's hard for a preacher to feed his family if that's the circumstance. So they, at one point, were training people to be bivocational so that they could have some work to actually take care of themselves and their families and also preach. But this program had fallen by the wayside. And so you can see in the bottom picture on the right here, these are some of the old not typewriters, but sewing machines. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. But that was one of the things that struck me as I was taking my tour. This man, Jeffrey, as I mentioned, he's the director of the school. This is Jeffrey. His wife is Mary and his two daughters. But not only is he the director of the school, he's also a missionary and an evangelist, like in the truest sense. He helps in churches in about 4 counties in the eastern part of Kenya. And he also told me he helps in churches in the western part. I said, well, okay, well, Jeffrey, how far are you going? You're helping with churches in the western part. How far are you going? He said that he's helping 6 churches that are about 800 kilometers from Meru. Okay. Well, how do you get there? So he has to drive. Okay. The difficulty, of course, is driving those kinds of distances. You got to have gas money, and he has insufficient support to take care of himself and his family. I had conversations with him about, the kind of support he gets, the amount of support he gets, and so forth. And he does get support from congregations or people in the United States. It's just insufficient for what he needs. So he's, telling me how he's borrowing money from this one and that one, and it's just not quite enough. He has his own support separate from the support that the school gets. And, in order for him to continue what he does, I was asking him about it. He has no savings. He's just like everything. He says, everything I'm doing to kind of help these churches. And, I have to my family kind of has to go without for me to do that. And that was a common theme with people that I talked to who were leaders in these churches. Just don't have very much support. So a couple of things that I saw during the week that I was there about this school, things that I thought would not be all that difficult, but would make a big difference. One of them is there's no internet in the school. As I said, they're sort of out somewhere, kind of remote. And so we traveled at a pretty good cost that for my family, I paid the cost personally. I got a little help from the law school, which I appreciated for my plane ticket, but, I just sort of paid for Caleb and I to go. It's a pretty expensive trip to take. But this is what they need when it comes to teaching, because the folks in this area, educational opportunities are pretty low, and they don't have people who have very much formal training in this area to teach others who want to learn the Bible, like well enough to go out into preaching and so forth. They're 6 or 7 hours from Nairobi. So sometimes they can get somebody from Nairobi to come to travel and to do some teaching for them, but of course they can't pay them. So whatever the person, they'll feed the person, and maybe they can take up some small donation, but it's not enough to even cover the person's like transportation costs and stuff. So when I saw what was happening there, I said, boy, what would it cost to get the internet here? And they didn't know at the time, but I did take a look and found out, and, we're talking about probably $500 to have the equipment delivered to the school and set up so that they could have access to the internet. And of course, if they had the internet, this opens up a whole other world of opportunities for them, because folks from the United States or other places could teach remotely, and just all the access to materials, to Bible study materials and videos and all kinds of stuff that have access to they don't have now. Another thing that I sort of nailed down with Jeffrey after this, because I saw what was happening with Sylvia with this sewing program. And so I had a conversation with Jeffrey after that. And I'm asking him, what kinds of vocational programs do you guys need? Okay. The sewing program, he said that would be important for the women, and masonry for the men, because it's, the area is underdeveloped, but they're trying to develop it. People are building church buildings and homes and all this kind of stuff. And he said, we need people to learn masonry to help with these kinds of projects. And then I, of course, asked him, well, what would it cost to get these kinds of programs off the ground? Now, he mentioned probably 5 things that they could potentially do. But, in conversation, we kind of agreed the masonry program and the sewing program would be probably the most important and influential, so that when people come to learn about preaching, they could also learn a skill that they could use to support themselves while they preached, knowing that these churches are not going to be able to really support them. And for each of these, it'd be probably a couple of $1,000s of an initial investment to buy the materials, to hire a teacher, because they'd have to hire some outside teacher to come and teach their students, these particular trades, and then probably some maybe a couple $100 of infusion each month for renewing the materials and so forth. There's also a need for financial support for the school. Now, I talked to Rick. Rick is one of the missionaries, as I said, who had been there for a long time. He's, he and some others, I guess, folks that he knows, they are the primary supporters for the school. And so, they send about $500 a month for everything. And I asked Rick about it when we're standing there in the school, and he said, it's not enough. I said, how much do you think you need? He said, well, probably $1,000 a month is what we need, but 500 is what we have. So that's to pay the 2 full-time staff people. That's to buy any supplies that they need. That's to pay the electric bills, like everything. And I talked to Jeffrey after he confirmed that, it's just not enough. He can't do what needs to be done with that. And this is part of the reason that the buildings are in great disrepair, because they don't have enough money to even take care of the basic monthly things that they need to take care of. So the buildings have been neglected for years. And while I was there, I asked about getting estimates for the repairs that needed to be done, and was able to get those. And, I'm not going to belabor that now, but, we're talking about, for US dollars, $1,500 to make the repairs that are needed to this building. $1,500 here, $2,500 there. Water is a big concern. They have droughts and stuff. They don't have enough water. So I suggested replacing the roofing that they have so they could put gutters on there and capture water, to repair everything that needs to be done on the campus, which I have a detailed itemization for all of this. It's like $10,000 to fix everything that needs to be done, put new roofs on there so they can have water. But, that's a bigger thing. But these are just the things that I identified when I was there going through. So that's at the Meru School. Now, that first Sunday I mentioned, we were at the Kithain Church. And this is a picture of the assembly at the Kithain Church. The buildings are, it's 4 walls, it's a dirt floor. And, you can see what's happening there. The lighting is natural light, but the building was full and lots of young people. So this photo actually shows several of the young people who had come forward, and they were singing a hymn. That's a pretty typical thing, that different young people come forward and sing hymns. I preached there. Mike preached a sermon there. I preached a sermon there as well. And after the services are over, this is Caleb, and Jeffrey is sitting next to him. You can see the walker there in front of him. Jeffrey had a pretty bad accident a few years ago, and so his walking is very much hindered by that. But he still gets around and does all this work that he does. And this is Caleb talking to groups of young people. Now, there's some that you can see, and then there's other young people on the other side. And then after the services are over, you can see the picture on the right. Caleb is outside hanging out with some of the young people. And he said that there was a different kind of conversation. He's having one conversation with them when they got, an old timer sitting there sort of monitoring everything they say. But when they went outside, they're asking him, all kinds of questions. And that was probably the most helpful time for him and for them, was that time they had by themselves to talk. Now I'm going to mention, I told you we were at the school for the 1 week, and we went there that Saturday to visit. Then we went to the Kithain Church that Sunday. Then we were back at the school all during the week teaching our class on Revelation. When we left the Meru area, we went to the Maasai area. Maasai is a people group, pretty fierce warrior group of people, historically. We went to this area. Now, you can't just wander into the Maasai area, apparently. You need an escort. And this man, Joseph, was our escort. We drove to, I don't know, a couple of hours or what have you. We drove to like a gas station, and he met us there. And then he took us up into this area back to where he and his family live and where the church is. The roads are very, very difficult, even worse here. So we're going further and further away from Nairobi. And what I noticed is the further and further away we went, the poorer and poorer things became. And this area where we went with Joseph is further away from Meru, which was a pretty poor area to start with. This was poorer still. But he met us. I don't know how he got to the gas station because it took us in a vehicle a good while over some very difficult roads to get to where he lived. I think he walked. I didn't ask him, but we met him early in the morning. He had gotten there to meet us, and he preaches for the Chumvi Church of Christ, which is where I preached that second Sunday. And this man he's a leader in that church there, but he's a leader in many of the churches in the Messiah area. Like he's helped either start these churches or he's helped them in some way. Like he's very well known, very well plugged in the churches, but also in his community. He's helped to start schools there. At one point, they didn't have any schools because the people are more remote and maybe a little bit more distant. They were more nomadic, I think, at some point. But they didn't have any schools. And so they started elementary schools, but they didn't have secondary schools. And he has helped to start a secondary school in the community where he is. And I also make note of the fact that he's able to teach drip irrigation. Like he's got some education in agriculture and things like that, and that I think could be leveraged to be very helpful. And I'll say something more about that in just a moment. When I went to visit his house, and I've got some pictures of the compound where he lives, they didn't have water. It was kind of a stark thing, you're out here almost in the middle of nowhere. It looks like you guys don't have water. Obviously, you need water to live. So I'm asking him, hey, where do you get water from? And we were standing out, and he shows me in this great distance, there is a body of water up there, like a spring or something. It's a great distance. And I said, okay, well, how do you get it from there to here? And he said, well, the government had run water to some distant point, but not as far as that. And he said, we're responsible for getting water from there. And he showed me how he and I guess some people in his community had been trying to bring water from this distant location to the area where they live. And they hadn't quite made it. So I asked him when I came back to the U.S., I sent him a message, and I said, it's what I asked him is here. I just took this from the exchange I had with him. I said, Brother Joseph, what all do you need to complete the water supply to your home? He said, hi, Brother Melvin, I need pipes and a storage tank. They all have these sort of barrels, these large, they're not barrels, but these large storage tanks. And sometimes they can catch water off of the roof, which is what I was suggesting that needed to be done at the school. And sometimes it's because there is some water line somewhere that, every now and again, the government will open up water and allow it to flow. And if you have something to store water in, you can do that. And he said, so I think the pipe is 2,500 Kenyan shillings and a storage tank, which is 28,000 Kenyan shillings. Oh, boy. Okay. He said the storage tank is very important because I will have enough water for irrigation. Now, this is what I was telling you. The man knows what to do, but it's hard to do it if you don't have any water to do it with. And he says, be blessed, brother. So 30,500 Kenyan shillings, that's what he needs. That is less than $250 US. So the man needs $250 US so that he can have water for his family and be able to grow food, take care of his animals, and teach other people in his community how to do these kinds of things, drip irrigation and so forth. $250 is what he needs. So this is his the compound where he lives. So he meets us and takes us to his home. And you can see in the picture on the right, there's a gate there. I told you everywhere you went, there's a gate. And there's some kind of fencing, there's some kind of vegetation or something that's being used as a boundary. You can see that in the borders of these pictures. So we drive into his compound here, and you can see how barren everything is, okay? And you can see these structures. Those are the dwellings. So this is where Joseph and his family live. So you saw the big skylines and stuff in Nairobi, typical big city. I do have some pictures, but I didn't put them here about sort of the housing in Meru, but it's different than this. Um, this is sort of this is what it was. It was, wooden kind of skeletal structure with mud and stuff like that, and a door. And there were, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 of these inside the compound, inside the enclosure. So that's Joseph on the left. He's looking into one of those. And the bottom picture here is at least 2 of these are his kids. I think a couple of these maybe were not, but the boy is his boy. And Mike had brought a couple of inflatable balls, like from the dollar store. And of course, at both of the churches, he broke these balls out. They were a big hit. That's what you see here. The picture on the top left is Joseph, his son, to the left on the screen, his mother in the middle, and that's his daughter on the right of the screen. The picture on the top right, okay, starting from right to left, in the black, that's his wife. And then you see his daughter and his mother. And this is Miranda again, the white woman there in the middle, who we went with. And then you have 2 ladies. And honestly, I don't know who those ladies are. I think they just live like nearby and had come over. This picture in the middle, this was inside one of the dwelling structures. So we went in here and I was sitting next to Caleb and Joseph was sitting on the other side next to Rick. That's the size of the inside. And they had presented what was a feast. You know, they don't eat like this, like probably ever. He had gone way out of his way and probably had to save for weeks or months to, I don't know, to produce a spread like this. So we've got like omelets there, and there's some kind of a sausage or something there. There's bananas, a couple different kinds of bananas and breads. And the man had like some kind of preserves or jelly. He had, these juices like Del Monte juices. They don't have refrigerators, okay? So this was a great expense to him to provide this kind of food for us. This is not the way his family would typically eat. Like I ate at different people's homes. And so I kind of have a sense for, okay, upper class people get to eat like this. Middle class people get to eat like this. There's very few people in the upper class, very few people in the middle classes. Most people are just poor. And I ate what they ate, and it wasn't like this. So I put a couple of scriptures on the screen just because they really reminded me this sort of Joseph went above and beyond in several ways. And it just reminded me like what the Bible says about hospitality, you know, Christians showing hospitality to one another and even to strangers. And I thought about in 2 Corinthians 8, where Paul says, the people were poor, and out of their deep poverty, they gave. Like that's what this was. This man doesn't have very much. He doesn't have water for his family. You can see sort of the dwelling structures that they have, and he sacrificed greatly to provide for us the way he did. But so we had breakfast at his house, and then we left his house and we went to the services with the Chumvi Church. And it's customary when you have visitors for visitors to greet the church, and there's sort of a little bit of a formula to it. You know, this is who I am, and I bring you greetings on behalf of these folks and that kind of thing. And so Caleb did that. You know, when we were at Kithain, he did that, and he did that here. I did that as well, and Joseph is our translator, and I preached the sermon that Sunday at the Chumvi Church. These are, again, just photos so you can get some idea. Again, it's just a structure with 4 walls, dirt floor, a door, and some metal paneling up top for the roofing with natural light, no electricity or anything. So you can see the crowd there for the assembly. We we had a baptism after the sermon that Sunday morning, which was, obviously a pleasant surprise. It's something you always hope people will respond. People seem to respond pretty regularly there. I've got pictures from Joseph, showing me he's going to this church and that church, and they're baptizing people. So, after the service is over, we had to walk to a place for the baptism. And so you can see sort of some of the procession there. I don't know, this was a mile and a half away. It wasn't like next door. So, people have suits and whatever they have on. We're walking a mile or mile and a half to get to a baptismal place. And this was the baptismal place. It's a hollow in between some rocks, and it's got water in it. It's standing water. So going down into the water, you got to make sure there's no snakes and critters and stuff down there in the water. They asked me if I wanted to do the baptism, and I would have been happy to do it. I was a bit saddened that I said, no, I don't think I can, because we were about to leave from here and be in a car for several hours, and I didn't have a change of clothes, right? So if I was to go down into the water and do the baptism, now I've got to sit in a car with everybody for 4 hours or whatever. So I said, well, I think I better not, because I don't have a change of clothes. But anyway, you can see on the right here, one of the brothers goes down into the water, with his suit on, and baptizes our new sister. Very good trip. We left the services, and Joseph took us to visit with some of the Maasai artisans. Now, these are women. The Maasai folks are well known for their jewelry and craft work and so forth. And these are some of the women who do this work. So we went out. It's kind of remote again. We're already fairly remote. We go out further remote still, and here are these women, and they are making all of this jewelry that sometimes gets sold on the internet and stuff like that. Well, these are the women who are actually producing this stuff. And so on the right, you can see some of the materials that they are making. Oh, by the way, all of these women are Christians. All of these women way out in this remote area who are producing these materials, this is them having business and engaging in industry and trying to support themselves. All of these women are Christians, and Joseph was instrumental in converting and helping these women. I know that because this is what they told me. He didn't tell me that. They would just come up to me and tell me, he's our preacher, and here's what he did for us, and that kind of thing. So he's a leader there in those churches. Now, I wanted to make mention. So I asked him about the water, and of course, his circumstance is no different than the people around him. They don't have water. And so obviously, you can't necessarily equip the whole countryside with water, but my thinking was it would be the most impact to help a person like him, because he has the education, and he has the influence to be a help to lots of other people. It was a similar thought that I had about the school. Jeffrey is a very influential person, and the school is sort of an epicenter for training preachers in this area. Can't help every individual, can't necessarily even help every church, but there are things that could possibly be done that could be leveraged if you're helping the right people in the right way to reach the most people. So, you can't give money to every preacher who might potentially want to preach. But if some kind of investment could be made so that preachers would have the ability to support themselves, it seems to me like that would go further potentially than just, giving this one money or that one money. Sometimes I think that's probably good and helpful. But on the grand scheme, I think it's better to try to make some investments that will help people become more self-sufficient. That's just my personal thinking anyway. This photo is just showing the return flight. We went to Kenya through Amsterdam, but going back, we went to Paris de Gaulle in France. So this is the flight, just the flight path of the plane. We went to France, then we took a flight from France to Detroit, then from Detroit to Atlanta, and then driving back. And I can't remember, but I think it was like 43 hours. It was quite painful, the trip back. It was like 43 hours from the time we left to the time we made it home. Uh, Painful return flight, but it was a great trip. It's continued to bless me just seeing the work of the church there, how people are really in deep poverty, but very, very enthusiastic about Christ and very, very hospitable everywhere we went. We were received like we were returning home. And of course, Caleb and I, two Black people, we're with three white people. That was never any issue or problem. But when we're introducing ourselves, because a couple of times, we were asked, like, well, you look like us, but you sound like them. Like people are like confused. What is going on here? So when we would introduce ourselves, I would say, my ancestors are from Africa. Like they were taken from Africa and have been in the United States for hundreds of years. My family members were slaves in the United States. And as far as I know, I am the first person in my direct line to come back to Africa to visit. This is my first trip to Kenya. And people would start clapping. Like it was just it was quite a dynamic for them and for us. So very good trip. I'm going to stop the screen share, and I'm happy to take any questions. I've got a few minutes. I told folks I wouldn't keep them any more than an hour. So I will take any questions. If you want to ask them, you can put them in the chat. If you want to unmute yourself to ask me a question, I'll try to answer those, and then I'll stop the recording in 10 minutes or so. And if people want to stick around to ask me anything, I've spoken in generalities. If you want to ask me any details, I'm happy to provide as much information as I can. All right. Any questions? Okay, one question here, was their library only in English? So they had English books. They had books like some of the books, you'd be familiar with if you went into a church library or something here. They also had materials that had been translated into Kimeru, which is the local language of the Meru people. They had both, but they need, obviously, a lot more resources for people to engage in deep study. They need some more resources. I do hope to go back, and if I go back, one of my suitcases just has to be filled with books. All right, other questions?
Hey, Melvin, can you maybe comment generally on the history of the church? How did they hear the gospel, and maybe just generally, how did the gospel get spread into the churches where they are today?
Okay, very good. I think in the 90s is when Rick and his wife were there in the Meru area. So it was the two of them, I think, and maybe two other couples who now they had some training here. They went to this area, had to learn the language and so forth, and just start sharing the gospel with people there locally. So they did, it was real mission work that they had done. And that has grown over whatever it's been, 30 years, 40 years, if it might have been in the late 80s or something. But over the course of 30 years or 40 years, the church has grown. Now, they left and have been gone for several years, but they did help to establish a couple of schools like the Meru School of Theology. There's the parent school, or maybe the first school, is in Nairobi in the capital city. And so the work has just been going on because the people who've been taught have been continuing to teach. Jeffrey, actually, the director of the Meru School, he actually left. I think he went to Nairobi to get some of his training. He went to Canada to further his education, and then he has gone back. So at this point, it is a primitive church in the sense of, the early church. Like in the Bible, this is the early church in Kenya. And there were some things I thought that were kind of insightful when you see how an early church kind of functions without all the stuff that we've grown accustomed to. I wanted to mention this. I wanted to just tell people about the trip because a lot of people have asked me about the trip. Um, I was asked, to share some of the details about some of the needs and so forth that people have. I've already committed, personally to doing certain things to help. But if folks are interested in helping, um, I'm happy to facilitate that. Um, if there's something in particular that you think I would like to help with, I'm happy to have a chat with you about that. And whatever it is that you specifically would like to help with, um, I would help you make sure that your help goes to that in particular. Um, One of the things I mentioned on the about the Meru school, and I did want to say something about this. So I was talking to McKenna. So McKenna was calling me like her son, and Caleb her grandson. Like, she was very, very kind to us. Her family is not well to do at all. They had us over for dinner. Um, Very hospitable, share everything they have. They just don't have as much. And she's very influential, as I said. So she travels around to these different churches and, teaches the women and helps organize the women to do different things. And once a year, the women in this region come together at the school for several days of teaching and training and so forth. And I was asking her about that. And I said, well, that's a great program. It's, how many sisters usually come? And she said, well, over 100. I said, well, that's pretty good. And she said, well, that's all that can afford to come because hundreds more would come if they could afford to come. And so I asked her, like, well, sister, how much does it cost, for a person to come? And she tells me, like, in shillings, but we're talking about $10 a person, and they can't afford it because they don't have any money. So in order for the ones who do go to go pay the $10, which is a transportation cost, essentially, they've got to like charter some kind of bus or something for them to get from wherever they live to the school. She said, some of these women are saving for months to get the $10 to come, and some of them can't do it. And so I thought, well, this would be something that I would think a lot of sisters would probably be willing to help with if they knew about it. I said, what would it cost, like, for all the sisters who want to come? I mean, how many buses do you need to get, and how much would it cost to just charter these buses to take people from, they have a sort of rally point or something where people could take the bus to get down to the school. And we're talking about somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000 for several hundred women to be able to go and participate in something like this. This is the kind of thing we take for granted, right? Ladies' days and women's programs, and the same thing for men. We kind of take these kinds of things for granted, where for them, this is like the big event for them once a year. So there's obviously opportunities to support that kind of thing as well. So I got a question here about the temperature. So the temperatures between Meru and Nairobi were pretty consistent, but it was very nice the whole time. Like, the high temperature while we were there was probably every day was in the 70s, low 70s, mid 70s, very moderate. So I'm looking at the temperature back in like Montgomery, and it's like 95. And there, here we are near the equator, and it's like 75. But it's because we're at higher elevations. When you go up higher elevations, obviously it's going to be a bit cooler up in the mountains. All right. Anybody else? Anything else? Right. Well, if not, I asked Carrie Lashley's one of the deacons at Perry Hill Road. I asked Carrie if he would say a prayer for us just to close out. If you have any questions after this, happy to answer. If you have an interest in helping in some way, I can give you more details about anything I said, or maybe something I didn't say. Happy to share the information with you. There's a lot of good, I think, that can be done pretty easily. given the needs that they have and the resources that we have. So, Carrie, if you don't mind, would you say a prayer for us? I appreciate it.